Hey folks, I have just finished watching Mayberry Man. Now, this is a movie that I have been wanting to see for a long time. I've been hearing about it for, it feels like 3 or 4 years. Maybe it isn't that long, but boy, oh boy, it's been a long time coming, and it showed up on Amazon Prime. I had to buy it, and I did that without hesitation. And while this is a movie review, and I will get somewhat critical on certain elements of the film, I knew this was a movie that I was going to love. I've been a lifelong fan of the Andy Griffith Show. So I'm going to tell you a whole bunch more about this movie and how you can watch it right now if you're interested. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Dave Sundstrom, and I like to think of myself as a bit of a pop culture historian, at least when it comes to music, movies, and especially television from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So today, we're going to talk about Mayberry Man. Now, this is a 2021 release directed by a feller named Stark Howell. And the premise of the film is that there's this arrogant, full of himself motion picture star who is sentenced by a small town judge to attend a week-long festival that celebrates the Andy Griffith Show. I think in the movie, they always call it the show. There might be some copyright restrictions that they ran into in terms of calling it the Andy Griffith Show in the movie, but that's absolutely what they're celebrating. He's sentenced to go and be a part of Mayberry Days. Now, an interesting thing about this movie is that in the film, he actually goes to Mayberry. Well, the reality is Mayberry Days is something that happens. I think in the movie they call it Mayberry Fest, but Mayberry Days is something that actually happens, but it's in Mount Airy, North Carolina, which is the birthplace of Andy Griffith. So anyway, there's a lot of fun that happens in this. I think it's an hour and 38 minutes is the runtime. It's not all that long. It's pretty brisk. It really flew by for me because there was just so much for me to enjoy being an Andy Griffith fan. But the question I have to ask myself is, if I were not an Andy Griffith fan, would I still enjoy this movie? And the answer is yes. But there's an asterisk there because it would be yes, but not as much as I did. So for Dave Sundstrom, the big fan of all things related to Mayberry, it's a 4-star film. I love it. For Dave Sundstrom, the guy who is trying to kind of think through what this would be like for your typical viewer, someone who's not as familiar with the Andy Griffith Show as I am, this is probably a 2.5 to 3-star film. So let me talk about the things that I liked first. I really like the plot. I'm a big fan of a film from going way back, starring Michael J. Fox, called Doc Hollywood, and I thought that this plot was going to be a little more similar to that. It was a plot, by the way, that the Pixar film Cars borrowed heavily from, and I thought maybe, just maybe, Mayberry Man was going to do the same thing. Now, in reality, they didn't as much. There's certainly an influence, but not as much. The things that I liked in it was obviously the love, the affection that is demonstrated in almost every single frame for the Andy Griffith Show. The cast is pretty good. I like Brett Varvel as the main character, Chris Stone, but I really loved Alan Newsome, who played himself, but he also, because most of the movie took place during Mayberry Fest, he played Floyd the Barber. And then Rick Roberts was also wonderful as a Barney tribute artist. And I also have to say that I really enjoyed Jacob Winter as Chris Stone's, that's the main character. Brett Varvel played him, but Chris Stone's assistant. He was just nutty and wonderful and fun, and I look forward to seeing him in future films. Now, I thought less successful was Ashley Elaine, who played the main female lead, a gal named Kate, who was an organizer for Mayberry Fest. And basically, she had been running this festival for years, apparently, because Chris Stone, the character that Brett Varvel plays, his father is an actor who showed up in a handful of episodes on the Andy Griffith Show. And they don't talk much about what role he played. And that is a really fun Easter egg at the very, very end of the movie. And I'm not going to spoil it for you here, but his father actually plays a pretty darn famous character on the Andy Griffith Show But I don't want to go into that here in this review. For you Andy Griffith fans, hang on to the very, very end and take a look at the pictures that Chris Stone is signing. And that will tell you who his father was and what makes it so much darn fun. That's all I can say. I can't say any more, but I think you're going to love it. The only problem I have with the character of Kate is that I really never understand why Mayberry is so important to her, what her connection is with the Andy Griffith Show, whereas I see that with a lot of the other characters. The film is, as I mentioned earlier, directed by Stark Howell. He does a fine job directing the movie. It moves at a great, like I said, a very brisk pace. Now, the editing, I have a little bit of an issue with. It's just a little bit of sloppy editing. There's a couple points in the movie where you switch to a scene and there are individuals in the scene that are standing on their marks and they haven't moved yet, and then they start moving. And for me, it was a little bit disconcerting to see that. Tightening up the editing just a tiny bit on just a couple of scenes would have eliminated that and would have made the film, which is a relatively low budget movie, would have made it seem all that more professional and more like a big budget production. Now, I don't mean to harp too much on the production values in this movie, because this film is a labor of love. The director Stark Howell and the producer Court Howell, they're sons of actor Hoke Howell, who played Dud Wash on the original Andy Griffith Show. So there's a connection there. I have nothing but applause and just a deep sense of gratefulness and appreciation to those individuals for making this movie happen. Now, I mentioned earlier that I loved Alan Newsom in this film. He is so good. And I've been a big fan of Alan Newsom for years. He's not a motion picture star by any means, but he has been a Floyd tribute artist for years. And he also runs a podcast called Two Chairs No Waiting that I've been subscribed to for as long as I can remember. And every week he has this really down-home folksy podcast where he shares a little bit of information, a little bit of updates regarding what's going on in Mount Airy, plays a little Andy Griffith trivia. It's just a really laid-back, wonderful podcast that I enjoy listening to when I'm getting ready to go to bed at night. But anyway, he's great. He's a breakout star in this movie. I think he is. He's just that wonderful. And he actually gets to step out of the Floyd character towards the end of the film. Again, I don't want to give too much away, but he's good in the role of Alan Newsom as well. Rick Roberts as Barney, wonderful. I just can't say enough about the various facial gestures this guy makes, and all of the tribute artists are great, but those two are definitely standouts, and perhaps that's why they ended up on the poster for Mayberry Man. So again, there's a handful of things. It's a low-budget film. The editing isn't quite as crisp as I would like to see it be. And there's some plot elements, particularly the romance between Chris and Kate, that feel like they either didn't get developed enough or they just shouldn't have been included. There are a couple of things there. Like I said, just little things that if I were, isn't that what we all do as critics? We say, this is what I would have done if I'd made the movie. I didn't make the movie. And that's why I want to be very careful in being overly critical of this film, because at the end of the day, I loved it. So it's 4 stars for those folks that feel like they might fall into the Dave Sundstrom camp. However, if you are more of a casual Andy Griffith fan, you've seen a handful of episodes, but you don't know the names of all the main characters, but this still looks like it might be interesting, fun, wholesome family entertainment, I would say, yes, it is. You will walk away from the film after an hour and a half and feel good. Those of you that are Andy Griffith fans, I hope you do what I did, which is go ahead and pony up the cash to buy the film right there on Amazon so you can watch it right now. I'll put a link to it in the description section so that you can do that. They need all the support they can get. I would love to see a Mayberry Man 2. And that's not going to happen unless this thing is somehow a cult hit that just develops a life of its own via streaming. That's really where it's going to happen. So I'll put the link in the description section. I would encourage you to go out and buy the film. I think it's $20 to buy it on streaming. That's what I paid. And if you wait, you wait a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, it'll probably show up on one of the streaming platforms. It's not free because you pay for the streaming platform, but you won't be paying the extra. But I'd encourage you to do it. Pony up the cash. Support Stark and Court Howell. This is a labor of love, and I would love to see their efforts rewarded. Folks, if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. Maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. I talk about music, movies, and mostly television from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. I call it the good stuff. But most importantly, and as always, thank you so much for watching.